our last speaker is Dr. Sarah Colby.
I will be talking about the College Environment Perception Survey. The college campus environment influences health-related behavior. The campus environment includes dining halls, vending machines, and availability and accessibility to space and supports for physical activity. Although the campus dining halls typically offer many different healthful dishes, they also present many barriers to healthful eating because they have a variety of calorically dense foods with low nutrient density. There are also often promotions for large portion sizes and have an all-you-can-eat format. In vending machines, the majority of snacks available are usually low in fiber and high in calories, fat, and sugar. In our previous work, we found that over half of the campus environments assessed for walkability and bikeability were considered unacceptable. So overall, we know that the campus environments that are not conducive to or supporting of healthful behaviors make it harder for students to make healthy choices. It's not only a matter of the environment actually being healthy, but the perceptions of the healthfulness of the environment also affects whether a health-related behavior will be performed. The model of community nutrition environments actually posits that objectively measurable aspects of the environment are equally important as an individual's perceptions of the environment's healthfulness. In perceived behavioral control, a critical construct to the theory of planned behavior indicates that the likelihood of engaging in a behavior is related to how difficult or easy individuals perceive the behavior will be to do. External objective factors beyond the individual's control can also modify the perceived behavioral control and alter the intention to carry out a behavior. This indicates that knowing how students perceive their environment so that interventions and programs to modify those perceptions may be just as important as making actual changes in the environment. And if resources to dedicate to promoting health on a college campus are limited, allocating them to this assessment and intervention on perceptions would be a way that would be a lower cost approach to improving and promoting behavior on college campuses. However, tools to assess college students' perceptions of the healthfulness of their college campuses were lacking, so we set out to develop and validate a tool to do this. The development of the CEPS, or College Environment Perception Survey, consisted of 4 steps. First, the questionnaire development, where it was literature review and expert panel. The second was a response process through cognitive interviews. The third was a concurrent criterion, which you'll see was a very novel approach here of in-depth interviews. And fourth was an internal structure, factor analysis of an internal consistency with Cronbach's alpha testing. The survey items were chosen and developed by a panel of 8 experts. They were working with an exhaustive review of literature and developed an initial pool of 48 items that was chosen based on the literature review and with the intent of having the items mirror the objective items that are in the Healthy Campus Environmental Audit so that these 2 tools could be used together. After initial development, content validation was conducted to verify that the items reflected the constructs that they were intended to measure. At the end of step 1, 33 items remained, each utilizing a 5-point Likert scale with answer choices from strongly agree to strongly disagree. Cognitive interviews were used to establish face validity of the survey items using a response process approach that was conducted with a convenient sample of 50 males and 50 female undergraduate college students that were between the ages of 18 and 24, and they were from 5 different universities with 10 males and 10 females from each university for a total of 100 cognitive interviews completed. The participants completed each of the 33 items in the survey and then engaged in a structured interview conducted by the trained researchers. During the interview, participants were asked to describe initial thoughts that they had after reading each item, and then explain what each survey item was asking in their own words, and indicate how they would answer the item and why they would answer it in that way. Cognitive interview data were independently coded by 2 researchers and qualitatively analyzed to determine whether students interpreted the items as intended by the researchers. Based on the findings from the cognitive interviews, 27 items remained. In-depth interviews were conducted to validate the 27 items remaining after the response processes using the concurrent criterion method. And this is where it gets very novel. So how do you have a gold standard to compare to if you're looking at perceptions that are inside somebody's mind? One way would be to talk to them. What an individual says might be the gold standard to what they're thinking in their mind, theoretically. So a convenient sample of 30 college students, 15 males and 15 females at one university, completed the written CEPS survey and then participated in an in-depth interview with questions that mirrored the content of the survey. The same trained interviewers conducted all of the interviews, and interviews were conducted either in person or over the phone and took approximately 20 minutes for each participant. Interviews were digitally recorded and transcribed verbatim, and after the interviews were transcribed, trained researchers coded the surveys and using a priori coding developed from the survey. For each survey question, there were 3 possible codes: 1, strongly agree and agree; 2, strongly disagree and disagree; and 3, neither agree nor disagree, or choose not to answer, or I do not know. For each participant, the codes from their surveys and the interviews were compared for agreement. Each code was recoded into 1, 2, or 3, with 1 indicating the code appeared or did not appear in both the survey and the interview, 2 indicating the code was in the survey but not in the interview, and 3 indicating the code appeared in the interview but not the survey. For each question, the 3 codes that corresponded to the question were added together. A score of 1 indicated agreement between the survey and the interview. Anything higher denoted a disagreement. Frequencies were used to analyze all of the questions, and all questions were checked to see if 80% agreement between the survey and the interviewer had been reached. The internal structure and consistency of CEPS was tested using a convenient sample of freshman students from 8 different universities that were recruited as part of a larger study. To test the internal structure of the CEPS questionnaire, the sample of student respondents was randomly split into 2 files using just a simple random selection process and SPSS, and 50% of the participants were selected in each group. Before further analysis, statistical differences between groups was tested using an independent samples t-test for the continuous age variable and a chi-square test of independence for the categorical variables of sex, race, ethnicity, and university attended. Then an exploratory factor analysis with Varimax rotation and Kaiser normalization was used to analyze the first split group. Factor analysis indicated the degree to which the survey items conformed to a priori constructs that were supportive of theory-based groupings of items. Iterative factor analysis eliminated items with low factor loadings below 0.40. A confirmatory factor analysis was completed with the second split half group using the same procedures as was done with the exploratory factor analysis. Before testing internal consistency, weighted scoring criteria was assigned to each item by a panel of content experts. This panel developed a weighted scoring system to allow for each of the identified concepts to have appropriate representation within the overall score ranging of 0 to 100 to allow for easy comparison. Each of the concepts had different number of questions, so the questions were assigned different valuing scores to reflect the equalized prioritization established by the content experts. The scoring criteria identified included a total possible score of 100 points, determined by summoning the scores of all factors. Physical activity questions, there were 4 of them, were valued at a maximum of 6 points each, so a possible total of 24 points from physical activity. Stress had 1 question and sleep had 1 question, and they were both scored as 6 possible points. So policy questions, there were 2 of those, and healthy food questions, there were 2, were scored at 10 points each for a total of 20 points per factor. Water had 3 questions with 4 points each for each of those questions, so a total of 12 points. Finally, vending had 2 questions and was assigned a possible score of 6 points each for a total of 12 points. For individual answer choices within each question, the total possible points were assigned to the strongly agree answer choice with evenly decreasing increments for agree, neither agree nor disagree, and disagree choices. The strongly disagree choice were scored as 0 for all questions, while the choose not to answer question were not included in analysis. After total scores for each factor, also called scale scores, were calculated. Cronbach's alpha was calculated using SPSS to determine the internal consistency of the scales. Results of the initial cognitive interviewing indicated that participants frequently misinterpreted 13 out of 33 items, or 39%. 5 items were eliminated due to multiple potential interpretations, 2 were merged due to redundancy, and 7 were modified to clarify wording. So the 8 merged and modified items were then cognitively tested, and results indicated no further changes were needed. The revised survey included 27 items at this point. Descriptive statistics were compiled to evaluate survey and interview agreement. The average agreement between the interview and the survey was 92%. Of the 27 items, 25 had an overall accuracy of 70% or more, thus meeting the criteria that had been set for agreement level. The remaining 2 items had an average overall accuracy of 61.5 and were removed because they'd failed to reach that 70% agreement criterion. Based on the interview comments, the expert panel made additional minor wording adjustments to 5 questions. In addition, the expert panel split 1 item into 2 items due to interviews results suggesting 2 different interpretations of the question. 26 items remained after this step. A sample of 1,108 freshman college students from 8 universities completed the CEPS questionnaire. The total sample was randomly split into groups for the exploratory factor analysis with 548 students in that group, and confirmatory factor analysis with 560 in that group. The 2 groups did not differ significantly by age, sex, race, ethnicity, or university they attended. During exploratory factor analysis, 11 items were removed iteratively due to low factor loadings, being again below 0.4, or cross-loading on more than one scale. A 5-factor solution emerged from the explorative factor analysis, with physical activity having 4 items, water having 3 items, vending 2 items, healthy food 2 items, policy 2 items. These 5 factors were then confirmed with a confirmatory analysis. The factor analysis was then completed for the total data set to ensure unidimensionality. The 15 items had factor loadings ranging from 0.4 to 0.99 for the exploratory factor analysis and 0.5 to 0.9 for the confirmatory. During exploratory factor analysis, 11 items were removed iteratively due to those low factor loadings, as we mentioned, or cross-loading. So that 5-factor solution emerged, as we mentioned, and the 5 factors were then confirmed, as I mentioned, with a confirmatory analysis. And that was the 5-factor analysis was then completed for the total data set, again, as I mentioned, with to ensure unidimensionality. So the 15 items, as I mentioned, range from that 0.4 to 0.9, and overall the 5-factor solution accounted for 65% of the total variance, with 2 additional items with factor loadings less than 0.4 being retained as single item indicators. One was regarding the construct of sleep and the other was stress. These items were included in the final questionnaire because the expert panel felt that it was important to support the comprehensiveness of the CEPS tool. The internal consistency for all the question items and scales were found to be at 0.69. Internal consistency of the individual scales ranged from 0.57 to a 0.77. Results of this sample testing of the questionnaire revealed interesting findings regarding the healthfulness of college campuses included in the study, or the perceptions the students had of that healthfulness. The average total CEPS score across universities was only 62.65, and that's out of a possible 100. That indicates that college students did not perceive their campus environment overall as being very healthy. In particular, the scales for vending and policy scored very poorly, with an average score of 2.91 out of a possible 12 and a 10.6 out of a possible 20. Therefore, targeted efforts to improve those specific aspects of the campus environment might be beneficial. Results of the sample testing of the questionnaire revealed interesting findings overall that could be used in future work and program development and have more significant cost-effective outcomes than actually changing the objective environment. So although there are tools available for objectively measuring the college campus environment, including the Healthy Campus environmental audit, this is the first known study to develop and validate a reliable survey tool to gather the perceptions of college students about the healthfulness of their campus environment. And we believe that the survey measuring college students' perceptions of their physical environment is an essential component in evaluating the campus environment that is separate from and in addition to objective measures.